Welcome, everybody. I'm Julie Wiskirchen from the authors team, and I'm pleased to welcome today Gustavo Arellano, who is the author of the book Ask a Mexican that you have in front of you. Gustavo is a staff writer with OC Weekly, an alternative newspaper in Orange County, a contributing editor to the Los Angeles Times op-ed pages, and a frequent guest on Public Radio International's Weekend America. He writes Ask a Mexican, a nationally syndicated column in which he answers any and all questions about America's spiciest and largest minority. The column has a weekly circulation of over 2 million in 35 newspapers across the United States, won the 2006 Association of Alternative Weeklies Award for Best Column, and was published in book form by Scribner Press in May 2007. Arellano has been the subject of press coverage in the LA Times, Houston Chronicle, Reuters, Mexico City's El Universal newspaper, The Today Show, Hannity and Combs, Nightline, The New York Times, Good Morning America, Utne, and The Colbert Report.
That was cool.
He lives in Orange County and is the proud son of 2 Mexican immigrants, one of whom was illegal. And today, in conversation with Gustavo, I'm pleased to welcome my friend Nova Gutierrez. Nova and I went to college together at Notre Dame many moons ago. And she just recently completed her doctorate in education. She's a Chicana educator and visual artist, originally from Robstown, Texas. Her artistic and academic work navigates feminist of color issues of identity and family history. She's interested in issues of representation of women of color, both in popular media and in the academy, and how women of color take control of representing themselves. Her artwork has been published in This Bridge We Call Home, edited by Gloria Anzaldúa and Ana Louise Keating. She has exhibited at galleries and institutions in New York City, Connecticut, and Massachusetts, and she also teaches at the Village Community School in Greenwich Village. So please join me in welcoming Nova and Gustavo.
Thank you.
So I was really excited to interview you after Julie mailed a copy of your book. I found it hilarious.
Thank you.
And the first question I have is, how does it feel to be the Mexican?
How does it feel to be the Mexican? Obviously, in the book, in the column, I assume this persona of like the Mexican, capital T, capital M, as in I am the all-knowing authority on everything and anything Mexican. Of course, I'm only the Mexican in my own mind, not really in the rest of the country, the rest of the world. So I like doing it. I like it. I think by assuming that persona, being much more aggressive than I really am in real life, I think people are able to see that the messenger is as sardonic and as sarcastic as the message that I'm trying to do with the column, or as satirical as what I'm trying to do in it, addressing the various issues that people have with Mexicans here in the United States.
Do you come up with the answers all on your own, or do you go to your group of friends and start like looking at questions?
I go pick up a Mexican on the street corner and tell them, what do you know about Mexicans? It all depends on the question. And just to give you guys, for those of you who aren't familiar with the column, Ask a Mexican, it's exactly what it sounds like. People send me questions about Mexicans and I answer the question. And it doesn't matter how stupid the question may be, how silly, how serious, whether it's about history, about immigration, about midgets, about Tabasco, and Tabasco is from Louisiana, of course. So it really doesn't matter. I answer the questions, and so each question then has its own answer, and obviously, but in terms of its own methodology, to be more specific. So if it's a serious question, a question dealing with statistics, with etymology, with history, then I'm going to do a little bit more research. I might talk to experts on the subject. If I'm trying to talk about a legal matter, there was a question recently where an 18-year-old said, I'm 18 years old, I was born in Mexico, and I came to this country illegally. I want to become a citizen. Do I have any recourse? So for a question like that, then I call up an immigration expert or lawyer, and I ask them, I tell them the boy's plight, then I ask them what could be done about it. So something like that, then I'll talk to people. If it's a question dealing, for instance, one time there was a question, why does the Virgin of Guadalupe have an Arabic name? Guadalupe is an Arabic name. So for something like that, I bought a couple of books on the Virgin of Guadalupe. I did research as if I were back in college at UCLA. That's my alma mater for my graduate studies. So that took me a couple of months, just trying to track down as much information as possible, and then I was finally able to answer the question as thoroughly as possible. But there's going to be some questions that they're just silly, and so I'm going to give a silly response. So for instance, one time somebody asked me, why do Mexicans like to sell oranges on the side of freeways? That's not going to take a study. So my answer was the first thing that I thought up off the top of my head, which is, what do you want them to sell? Steinway pianos? Give me a break. So something like that.
Do you have a favorite question?
All the questions are favorite. I've been doing this column now for about 3.5 years, and I get so many questions. I've answered so many questions, and I still get so many questions every single week. And I would say my favorite questions are the really, really stupid questions, the ones that have no basis in logic and are based all on stereotypes that people have, that if you think about those stereotypes, they're not true, and yet people believe them with all the conviction that they have. So my favorite, so in that light, my favorite questions, it's actually in the book, in the first chapter on language, a guy asks, why do Mexicans never learn English? Are they too stupid or dumb or lazy? Can't they learn 2 or 3 words a day? What's the problem with them? So my response to them was very simple. I said, the United States government shares your concerns. They recently finished this 4-year study, 65 volumes or so, on this new wave of immigrants that concluded that the new immigration as a class is far more inferior than the old class. In other words, they're saying that these new immigrants that are coming nowadays, they're idiots compared to the immigrants of the past. They're not learning English. They're poor. They're not doing anything to justify them being in this country. So therefore, we should clamp down on immigration. We should deport a lot of these immigrants back. They're not going to become Americans like those previous immigrants. And obviously, that's a lot of concern that people have about the immigration of today, whether it be legal or illegal. That's what they're saying on Fox News, on CNN, on the halls of Congress, and in city halls. But those words, that study was called the Dillingham Commission, or it was a Dillingham report made by the Dillingham Commission. That report was issued in 1911, and those idiot immigrants that they were attacking were Italians, were Poles, were Jews, everybody basically from Eastern and Southern Europe. And by the way, they were coming here legally, they were coming here the right way, and yet people still hated those immigrants. And of course, let's not even talk about the Chinese and Japanese, because they weren't even allowed in that country at the time. So I loved answering that question just with the facts, just with a previous study made about a century ago. And so my conclusion was this myth that somehow immigrants of the past, they walked off the boats, they chucked down their multisyllabic surnames immediately and learned English like that. It's bull pinche shit. It has no basis in the historical record. And there's a question, the question for Ask a Mexican this week, I can't remember the exact question because it was just going all over the map. But to part of my answer, I cited Benjamin Franklin. I think it was 1751, maybe a little bit later. He was talking about the Germans who were settling in the Pennsylvania Valley. And he goes off and he had this great name for them, Palatine Boers. That's what he called Germans. And he said that these Germans, they're not white, they're not going to learn English. If we allow more Germans into this country, they're actually going to Germanize the United States. And it's no longer going to be Anglo. Of course, Ben, good old Ben, he was disproven to that. So questions like that, I like those ignorant questions.
Well, just what you said at the end picks up on what I think is people's immigrant anxiety, is that they're going to change the U.S. And so when it used to be when I was little that if you took a taco for lunch instead of, ham and cheese sandwich, it was something you should cover up. And now when I see people eating wraps and it's just cold tortillas with stuff inside, I really realize how far it's gone. And the kids watch Dora. And one of the things I was reading in your book that I think everybody else would want to hear too is how you call The Simpsons one of the most Latino shows on TV. And I think that The Simpsons is, 100 years from now when people want to know about how it was like to live in this country at this time, The Simpsons is going to be a big window into it. And that, to me, was a huge point that you made. And it surprised me when I started to read everything that you were listing.
The 2 greatest contributions that America has given the world are democracy and The Simpsons. The Simpsons is just this amazing, amazing show. And it's funny that you're talking about how when you were younger, tacos weren't really known and now they're accepted. That's how immigration has always been a part of this country. It influences the United States, and of course the United States influences those immigrants because all those immigrants turn into America. So I was going to make the point with, I think there was one episode where Mr. Burns called pizza ethnic cuisine. You know how antiquated he is. He always, he one time called Japanese goldfish farmers and something like that. It was funny. But going back with The Simpsons, there's an essay in the book where I argue that The Simpsons is the most Latino show on television. And the only reason I could say that is because I'm a Simpsons geek. That's one of the few things in life where I could say I'm a true authority on all things Simpsons, because I've seen every episode like 36 times or so. So in the book, then I make a very, very nuanced argument. And please spare, for those of you who aren't Simpsons nerds, just spare me these couple of minutes to talk, or maybe 1 minute to talk about how Latino The Simpsons is. So if you guys will remember, How many of you are Simpsons fans here, by the way? Okay, a lot of you. Cool, cool. We're a bunch of nerds here then with Simpsons. So there was one episode when Krusty the Clown got canceled. So he's looking through the ratings and he says, oh, I got beaten by something called Channel Ocho, and of course he tunes in, it's Bumblebee Man running all over the place. Now, that same thing happens here in Los Angeles. The top-rated radio shows are in Spanish. The top-rated Spanish or newscast in the Los Angeles area are on Channel 34, Univision. So, what does that mean? That means that there's a lot of Latinos watching those programs. So same thing on The Simpsons. If Channel Ocho is beating Krusty the Clown, who's this entertainment legend, that can only mean that there's a lot of Latinos in Simpsons, and a lot of those Latinos are immigrants who are watching Spanish language television shows. So on that alone, that signifies that Springfield has this very big Latino presence in there. And then just other small things like, what's Bart Simpson's old catchphrase? Ay caramba. Ay caramba, it's in Spanish. And there was another one when in the Springfield nuclear power plant, when they went on strike, Homer one time, he says, oh yeah, I got this battle scar through a strike. And the strike, everyone's striking, and he's pounding on the taco truck, where's my burrito? Where's my burrito? Then the thing falls right on him and creates a scar. So just little nuances like that, that's what gets into my essay. And that's really what I try to, same thing with, Ask a Mexican those questions. I try to get into the nuances of things that can explain a little bit more. I'll even be as bold as to compare or not compare, but say Ask a Mexican very much tries to follow in the footsteps of The Simpsons, in that somebody who doesn't really know the show can enjoy it just on a superficial level, say, aha, that's funny, aha, that's cool. But the more you know about Mexican culture, the more, and not even just about Mexican culture, the more nerdy you are, the more the more layers you could appreciate in the book.
Yeah,
and the column, too.
I think also it might lead people to want to find out more, because I know when I was reading that segment on The Simpsons, I wanted to pull out all those episodes and look for the Aztec name on the theater, and then you talked about Maggie explaining the difference between Olmec and Maya.
The part where Lisa, oh geez, what episode was that?
Where Lisa was explaining to Maggie.
Lisa was trying to show Maggie things like, with cards saying, oh, Zebu, Zebu. And so it was when Bart saves Mr. Burns' life through a blood transfusion, and Mr. Burns just sends him the thank you note, and then Homer sends him a really angry letter that concludes with, you smell like an elephant spot. And so Mr. Burns then fires Homer, and they end up getting back together, but Mr. Burns buys Homer a big, huge warhead of the Olmec war god Ixtacalacapetl, and so at the very end then, no one knows what this is, Maggie pulls out a card that says, Aztec, and then Lisa says, no, not Aztec, Olmec. The only way anybody who's not obsessed with Chicano studies like us, the only way you're going to know those sort of subtleties is if you're influenced by Chicano studies. So I said that Lisa is probably going to be a Chicano studies major at some point in the future. So, or at least has a teacher with those influences. Not Miss Hoover though, very mean.
And so I was so interested, I'm very much into the pop culture that's in this whole book, and so I'm going to shift to a totally different topic, but one that is similar, and it was your discussion of why Mexicans are obsessed with Morrissey, another section that's really great in the book.
So in the book itself, it's broken up into different chapters. Immigration, of course, sex, a big one, ethnic relations, how Mexicans deal with various ethnic groups, food, and then one of the big ones is music. People want to know, people for some reason, and I don't really get it, but people are obsessed with Mexicans in music. So one question is, why do Mexicans like Morrissey? Morrissey of the Smiths. And if you go to any concert here, specifically in Southern California, you go in there and 90% of the audience is Mexican, dark skin with big pompadours, crying, or sometimes you'll even see gang members with shaved heads, 300-pound linebackers. They're crying and they're swaying to There Is a Light That Never Goes Out. It's the most bizarre thing. And so that's the second most asked question I ever get in the column. The most asked question is, why do Mexicans go into the ocean with their clothes on? I'm not going to answer that one. It's in the book. But specifically with Mexicans and Morrissey, that's the longest section in the book. I write this 5,000-word essay about, not experimenting, but examining the Morrissey phenomenon. Morrissey himself, he knows about it. He plays up to it, so I talk about that. And I give different factors for one, Morrissey's music, all of new wave music really is very much like Mexican ranchera music, very existential, very fatalistic. So I talk about those connections. I talk about how Morrissey plays this role of sort of this effeminate macho. In other words, he could be fey and so forth, but he's still very much of a man. And you see that strain, even though you see that strain a lot in Mexican ranchera music as well. But I ultimately conclude with the reality. Mexicans like Morrissey because Mexicans like good music, and Morrissey's a great musician. Great.
Yeah, and also a lot of heavy metal too. It goes all the way from Morrissey to heavy metal. I think that's great because I think people have a stereotype sometimes of Mexicans that only listen to ranchera, banda music or something.
That Mexicans only listen
Yeah.
to music made by men in funny hats.
Yeah.
That is a big stereotype. And so I always get these questions again and again. Why do Mexicans like Elvis so much? Why do Mexicans like heavy metal so much? Why do Mexicans like punk? Punk, this and that. And so when questions like that, I wouldn't say they're necessarily based in bigotry or racism. It's people who are really curious. It's true. Like there was, okay. During the 1950s in what was then the state of Yugoslavia, there was this big fad with mariachi music. So you'd have people singing in Serbian and Croat singing mariachi songs. So for somebody like me who thinks, what the hell are Slavs doing listening to Mexican music? That sparks curiosity in me. That's not necessarily going to be racist. So same thing with a lot of people who are asking a lot of the questions, not just about music, but things in general. People really are curious. When you go to a Mexican neighborhood and you see these big, massive trucks and you see a bull sticker in every single truck, people are going to be curious, why are Mexicans doing that? So a lot of the questions then, especially with pop music, I really don't think they're based out of bigotry. It's just a genuine curiosity. So for questions like that, for my answer, I am going to chide them just a little bit because that's really the persona that I try to do in the column, that there are no sacred cows. Everybody gets to be made fun of, whether you're my mother or Jim Gilchrist. It doesn't matter. I'm going to make fun of you. But I'm going to be a little bit more gentle with questions based out of that curiosity.
Mm-hmm. What's the shortest answer you ever gave to a question? Do you remember?
Oh, yeah. I know because I ramble a lot. A guy wanted to know if he could call him, what was it? It's in the book too, but he wanted to know if he wanted to make up a new ethnic nickname for himself because he was a white guy who hung around with Mexicans, so he considered himself Mexican. And I'm perfectly fine with that. If you want to call yourself Mexican, go ahead. But he made this really dumb nickname that both insulted everyone. It was just stupid. So my response was just no, just flat out no.
No.
Yeah, just no at all. So.
All right, let me see. I wrote some other questions down. What does your family think about your column when it started to get popular, or they started?
My family. I'll talk a little bit about actually my upbringing. So I am the child of Mexican immigrants. My dad was illegal. He came in the trunk of a Chevy in '68. My mom, she came here legally. I was born to them in 1979, so the first language I spoke was Spanish, but when I entered kindergarten, of course, when I entered kindergarten, the only language I spoke was Spanish, and here I am talking in English. But both my parents, they're now both citizens. They've each lived in this country about, I want to say 45 years or so, and their primary language is still Spanish. I mean, they base it, for lack of a better term, they live in Mexico here in the United States. Their entire life is in Mexico. They could speak English. I mean, they could speak to any one of you here, but they prefer to live their lives in Spanish. So they're still very much that stereotype. Conservative, very Catholic, very this and that. So most people think that they're offended by the column because the column uses a lot of swear words, it plays around with stereotypes, makes fun of Mexicans a lot of times, but also makes fun of racists and so forth. But my parents, they like it. They see what I'm trying to do. My mom, the only time she doesn't like the column is whenever I talk about sex, because all Mexican moms think their children are forever virgins. So, that's not true. So that's the only time she doesn't like reading it, when it's ever about sex, and it is about sex quite often. And then my dad, the only time he ever had a concern with the column, one time he pulls me aside and says, "Mira, Gustavo, you're cussing too much. You're using too many curse words." Before I could make up an excuse for him, though, he says, "But you know what? On second thought, us Mexican men, we cuss like sailors. So go ahead. You're just saying the truth." So they like they do like the column. And all my aunts and uncles, they're just proud of their little Guti being able to do something with themselves or with himself.
Do they read? Do you think that they read them all? Do they read all?
They do read it. One of the misperceptions about the column is that the only people who read it would be racist white folks and self-hating Mexicans, but that's not the case at all. I would say probably 40% of the audience are Latinos, for lack of a better term. Out of those Latinos, it's all Latinos, from fifth-generation Mexican Americans who only speak English, to the children of Mexican immigrants like myself, to Mexican immigrants here in the United States reading the column in English but writing to me in Spanish, to Mexicans in Mexico City who are trying to show off and write to me in English. And then the other 40% would be white folks, for lack of a better term, 10 to 15% Asian Americans under that big 10 to 15% African American. So, but I get all types of people reading the column. When I went to San Diego, there was a large contingent of Filipino immigrants who were speaking to me in accented English, and they went up to me and said, "We're big fans of your column because everything you say about Mexicans, you're saying about us Filipinos. We're basically brothers like that, except, and not only that, we have Hispanic surnames, and we were colonized by Spanish all over the map." So, yeah, people read it.
Do you know if it's inspired any copycat ones, like Ask an Italian, Ask?
There's a lot of rip-off artists out there. And I'm perfectly fine because pirateria, the art of forgery, it's a very proud Mexican tradition. So I feel it to be an honor. The ones that I know, Ask a Cuban American, it was really great, but he hasn't updated in a while, unfortunately. Ask a Korean updates every single week, and it's great. I think it's askakorean.net, or just Google Ask a Korean. Do that. Let's see. There's Ask a Korean. There's a guy who does YouTube segments of Ask a Jew. There was one guy who was doing Ask a Daisy for a while. Daisy, being an Indian American, but I don't know if he continued doing that. And people always say, "Well, I'm going to start a column called Ask an American and show the reality." And I always tell them, go ahead and do it. And more often than not, though, people don't continue doing it because it is. Writing a column is hard. Whatever column you do, it's hard because you give an expectation to the audience or to your readers of what you're going to do every single week, and you have to not only match it every single week, but top it every single week. And to me, that's always been the hardest thing, to maintain the column, as whether you like it or not, as high or as low as it's always been. So I think it's great that people are ripping me off. I think it's perfectly fine. And of course, there's the other phenomenons like Ask a Ninja, Ask a Chola, and I don't know if they came before me or after me. But I don't really care. But going back to the Simpsons, though, people have always, there's been this Ask Us since the beginning of of writing columns. In fact, even people like Ann Landers or. What's the other? No, well, Amy Alkin's another person, but Dear Abby, there's always this idea, like, I'm an expert on something, ask me questions. Going back to The Simpsons, a great joke is when the show Gabbo came on and Krusty the Clown, he made this bit where he makes crank phone calls, and then they do that to Krusty the Clown, and he finds out, and then Krusty says, "Hey, if this is anybody but Steve Allen, you're stealing my bit." So we've always been ripping each other off since the beginning of time. Ecclesiastes, what did it say? There's nothing new under the sun, so please rip me off, even though I ripped somebody off, probably.
So what is the response you're getting from other Mexicans? Like in reading your book, I saw that he has a glossary in the front that explains a lot of the different terms, but like between Mexican American, Chicanos, there's a lot, I identify as Chicana, yeah. But there's definitely, I know, a difference to Chicanos in California. Some of the militancy that they have.
Oh,
right?
sure. The reaction to the column has varied. I would say just the people who get in contact with me, 70% of them like the column, the other 30% don't. And it really varies on ethnic group. I have fans from all over the block. I have haters from all over the block. So, there's some people, self-identified Chicanos, who say, "Oh, you're perpetuating stereotypes, you're a vendido, a sellout." There's self-identified Chicanos who say, "This is the best Chicano satire since Culture Clash," or whatever. Mm-hmm. There's Hispanic advocacy groups who who try to pressure papers and say, "This guy's, just horrible, just, saying all this hatred about Mexicans." But then there's other groups like the National Hispanic Media Coalition who's given me awards for positive portrayals of Latinos in the media. So it's varied either way. But as long as people are reading, honestly, I don't really care what people think about it as long as they're reading. I always tell people, if you really truly hate me, the worst thing you could do to me is not tell me. Because if you tell me that you hate me, that shows to me that you're reading me, and that makes me really happy, and that inflates my ego. But if you don't say a single word, the best way to get into journalists is under his skin is not saying a single word. Nothing. Mm-hmm. That gets me freaked out.
Is there a question that you're still waiting for to answer? Is there a question that you wish someone would ask that you have ever got to answer? Or do you ever make up a question if you don't?
The column started in November of 2004 as a joke between my editor and I. We were trying to make, because the OC Weekly, sometimes we make up fake news stories just to mess with people's minds, kind of like The Onion. And so we decided to do this column to talk about the state of immigration in Orange County, because in Orange County you have you have the worst kinds of both sides. You have people on one side saying Mexicans are trying to take over the United States, they're trying to rape our women, and they don't even tip properly. And then you have people on the other side saying, this used to be our land, all gringo invaders going back, go back to Europe. So we decided to do this column to make fun of both sides, make it a satirical commentary on that. So I made up the first question, which was, I asked myself, why do Mexicans call white people gringos? And then my response was that only gringos call gringos gringos and Mexicans call gringos gabachos. Obviously, in my answer, I already contradicted myself. So that was done specifically so people knew that that was a joke. But people didn't get the joke. People started getting all pissed off, and more importantly, people started sending in questions. So the only question I ever made up was the very first one. Ever since then, every single question people have sent me, they have made it up. The only thing I ever do, if it's too long, I cut it for space constraint. I clean it up for grammar's purposes because people don't know how to use semicolons anymore. And then I make up, I tell people to make up pseudonyms for themselves, funny ones, because if they don't make one up, then I'll make one up for them. They don't want that to happen. So is there a question that I want people to ask me?
Like one that, just something you're dying to share in terms of
You know what? No, because the only thing I ever wanted people to know is that Mexicans really like Charles Bronson movies, and somebody asked that already. So, and I was able to answer. Yeah, when Charles Bronson died a couple years ago, all my friends, all my aunts and uncles, we had a day of remembrance for him. We saw Death Wish 1 through 5, and we wished him well in hell.
That's true. But everyone in all the Chicanos in Texas love Charles Bronson.
Charles Bronson's a man. Clint Eastwood,
Yeah.
Any sort of those macho archetypes. Sylvester Stallone, Chuck Norris, of course, is a big one. But we beat all you hipsters who like Chuck Norris by liking Charles Bronson since the very beginning. We never liked him ironically. We always liked him for who he was. A guy who didn't speak much, shot a bunch of people, and looked like a Mexican.
Well, I was going to say, it's because he looks like a Mexican.
Oh yeah, he even played a Mexican a couple of times. I know Once Upon a Time in the West, and then I think there was another movie where he played a Mexican, or at least half Mexican. So great movie guy, great movie guy.
So do you plan to continue the column for a long period of time? And what are your next plans after this book?
I'm going to continue doing the column as long as I'm interested in it. I've faced boycotts from people. I've even had death threats thrown to me by people saying, if you keep doing this, you better be careful, whatever. None of that matters to me. Even when nobody reads a column anymore, when people just don't give a damn about it, I'm just going to turn it into a column about etymology, about the study of language, and just keep running it until I'm bored with it. And the day I'm bored with it, I just walk away and not have any regrets of it. I've had a good run. There's still so many great questions that people send in to me. I probably get about, I'll say 50 questions a week, every week, but half of them are questions people have already sent in. So to give people a sense of how many questions I still have to answer, because one time I told people, I'm going to stop the column when there's no more questions to answer. But I answer 2 questions a week, every week. If no one ever sent me any more questions, I have enough material to last me 6 years. My archives for the questions, it's actually in my laptop here in my bag. It's a Microsoft Word document, Times New Roman 12-point font, single-spaced, 245 pages of questions I haven't answered yet. Every single one of them unique. I don't put in repeats there. If I get a repeat question, I just leave the one that's better written. But all those unique, a lot of them are just magnificent questions, both in a good way and a bad way. So as a journalist, I want to answer those questions eventually, but I have to keep delaying it. Then on top of that, though, I'm still getting more questions. There was a question recently. I just got it today. Just such a stupid question. He said, "I'm Hispanic. I'm not a Mexican. I'm not." Just starts throwing all these insults against Mexicans. So I forgot what his exact question was, but I'm ready to pull out my knives and just eviscerate the guy. It's going to be fun. How could I not want to do something fun?
Yeah, and I like how you correct the misspellings when you leave them in. Like somebody was criticizing illegal immigrants and spelled illegal wrong, and yeah, you go through.
Sometimes I clean it up just for grammar's purposes, but sometimes if the person who has a question is really stupid, sometimes I just leave the rant as is, because you can't make up rants. Rants are genius. If I wanted to make up a rant, I wouldn't be able to make up some of the questions people have. It's just impossible.
So do you have a favorite Mexican out there, either famous or not famous?
A favorite Mexican out there? Well, the cliched part, of course, is my parents. My parents are my favorite Mexicans. The non-cliched part, what Mexicans do I like? Well, musicians, of course. Ramon Ayala. Ramon Ayala is known as the king of the accordion. He's really the guy who created norteño music, which is, for those of you guys who don't know, norteño music, that's the one with the accordions, and then the one that sounds like umpa music, that's called banda sinaloense. But Ramon Ayala, I mean, he's such a legend in the accordion world. He's played in Poland, he's played in polka festivals in Cleveland. He's just a genius guy. He's cool. I admire him a lot just because he's this portly, chubby guy. If you look at him, to anybody, it would seem like the stereotype of, he's like the quintessential Mexican, but he's a cool guy. I think he lives in Texas, doesn't he? Like somewhere down in the valley, but great guy. So I like him. I mean, other than that, who else would I like? Just anybody, any Mexican who doesn't, who's in a gang member, I guess. Sure, that's it. That's about it. All other Mexicans, we're fine. Yeah, just like anybody else. Just as long as you're not doing bad things, then go for it. Go nuts.
So what do you think about, there's a lot of the Latino explosion on TV now. What do you think of, I was wondering what you thought of the show Ugly Betty. And you think of that representation?
I like Ugly Betty. I like it. Originally, Ugly Betty was a telenovela soap opera from Colombia called Yo Soy Betty la Fea, I Am Betty the Ugly. And it talks about, if you guys have seen the show, it's roughly like the telenovela, which is there's this really homely lady who works at this fashion magazine, or I think it's different in the Colombian telenovela, and the entire show, people heap ridicule on her and so forth, but she's very much the heroine because she's really a great person. And so I think it's great that somebody like that, or a show like that, gets on television, and in the show, it's not, even though she is a Latina, that's not the focus of the show. The focus on her is her being this ugly duckling in the high-powered world of New York fashion. So the fact that this show is treating her Latina-ness almost as an afterthought, I think is revolutionary, because before that, almost any time there's a Latino on the show, they're the Latino. They over-enunciate, they talk like this, and they and all those stereotypes. Like that show Kane that was on CBS. Oh my God, it was horrible. Cuban rum dynasty, and of course every single time if they weren't fighting each other, they were salsa dancing or they were making mad, passionate monkey love. All this crazy stuff. That's just stereotypes. I want shows that, like The Simpsons, like the show, when the Latinos come on in The Simpsons, yeah, it's a little bit stereotypical, but it's done very much as a satirical reference point, and sometimes they're just treated as is. So Ugly Betty, in that sense, I think it's great because it treats Latinos as is. Sure, they have their own quirks, and sometimes they might be cooking too much dinner or so forth, but whatever. To me, that's besides the point of the focus of the show, and I think the focus of the show, it's a funny show.
Before your editor came up with this idea, were you ever already doing that kind of thing, like answering people's or commenting on these kinds of topics when you were younger? Or
not really. I grew up in Anaheim, born and raised in Anaheim, California, in Orange County. So Orange County has this stereotype as being very white, very Republican, very conservative. That wasn't the experience I grew up with. I went through the Anaheim school system. Almost always students were the super majority Latino, like 75 up to 90%. But even the, quote, white kids, black kids, and Asian kids, they were all immigrants. The white kids were the children of refugees from the former Soviet bloc, mostly Romania. The black kids were kids from Nigeria, Somalia, Ghana, and not so much Egypt. And there was a lot of Muslim kids too. And so the Asian kids, they were mostly from Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. So we were all children of immigrants. We had questions about each other, but we just accepted our differences as is. It wasn't really the only person who ever asked me, like, oh, why do Mexicans do this? Why do Mexicans do that? Was my boss. He was the one who wanted to know all these questions about Mexicans. And to me, I find it odd that people make it a point to ask a particular question about your culture, because I love all cultures, I love all people, but I don't spend my days wondering, geez, why do people, I don't know, why do Indians do this, this, and that, or why do Somalis do this, this, and that? It's not, there's some questions that I have, but I just find out about it naturally, not going out and making a point about it. So I never grew up being the person who had all the questions about Mexicans. That's just something that came in my professional career, and sure, so I just continued to do it.
Did you find that people, I know when, being the only person of color in a classroom or in a job, everybody goes to you with the question if it's about Native people, black people,
sure.
If you're the only one. Did you have that experience?
Yeah, as a reporter, because before I started doing the column, and still to this day, I'm still a reporter with the OC Weekly. So I'm an investigative reporter. I do a lot of stuff on religion, on political scandal, immigration, of course. And I'm also the food editor for the OC Weekly. So if any of you out there ever have a question about food, like the best restaurants in Orange County, email me or even ask me after this. That's actually my real passion, food. But because I was also, for the longest time, I was the only person of color on staff, I became the token everything. So I became the token Muslim, the token Vietnamese, the token Pakistani. Because we have large communities of Vietnamese, Muslims, and Pakistanis in Orange County. So the other reporters, they didn't really want to cover that for whatever reason. I'm not going to say they're racist or anything, but they just didn't want to cover those communities. I knew, though, if we wanted to be a relevant paper in Orange County, we had to go cover them. And the sad part is that there's not even that many reporters out there. So, like, I have a lot of Muslim friends, and they'd say, "Oh, you're the best Muslim reporter in Orange County, Gustavo," even though I'm Catholic, because nobody was covering their community in a nuanced way. They only wanted to do, terrorism stories, hijab stories, and a new mosque opening up stories. So, I find it sad, but whatever. I'm not going to begrudge those people too much. I'm just going to go do the job that they should have been doing, but that they don't want to do.
Has that changed at all over the last few years? Meaning, is it more diverse where you work?
Yeah, we have a Asian American young lady, a Guatemalan lady. We might be hiring an Indian guy. I'm not sure, but yeah, it has changed a little bit. There's been a little bit more focus on covering all those communities. And I'm not saying you have to be a member of a particular community to cover the community, but I am saying that you have to cover those communities. And usually if you are from that community, you're going to have more of an incentive to cover it. So when I joined the OC Weekly around 2001 as a freelancer, they were doing stories about the Latino community, but they were just they had this particular story that they kept telling again and again and again. I think there has to be nuance when we cover different communities, and nuance is something that's usually a little bit better done by somebody from that community, but that's not necessarily true all the time either.
So can you tell us a little bit about your next book that you've been working on?
Yeah, the next book's going to come out Mexican Independence Day. It's called Orange County, A Personal History. So half of it deals with the history of Orange County, how Orange County has influenced the United States in various ways: religion, pop culture, immigration, just master plan communities. So that's one half. The other half's going to be the history of my family's 4 generations between Mexico and the United States. And that segment of the book, it's kind of a memoir, but it's really history of my family. So that's where I'm going to make the very bold assertion that Mexicans really are no different than anyone else. That Mexicans do learn English. That Mexicans do get jobs outside of picking oranges. It's going to be the boldest book of the year. It really is.
And could you tell everyone when Mexican Independence Day is?
Mexican Independence Day is September 16th.
I think we should open it up for questions, because I bet some of you have some good questions out there he can answer on the spot.
Please.
Yeah.
About anything. Don't be shy.
Yeah.
Right there.
Given the volume of emails that you receive, are you ever genuinely surprised anymore, or is it all just kind of variants of the same thing?
The question was, given all the email that I get, am I ever surprised with any questions? I get surprised every single time. To me, that's the most amazing part of doing this column, is that you would expect that since I've answered so many questions and I have so many questions, that I would get a lot of repeats. I would only say, I said about half of them are repeats, but so many questions are just unique, that come completely out of left field. Like, some of them are stereotypes. Like somebody said the other day, "Oh, why are Mexicans so lazy?" Okay, that's been the stereotype we've been playing around for the longest time. But then there was another one recently. It's actually going to come out this Thursday. Somebody said, "Why are Mexican sports fans so much more vulgar than white sports fans?" And they were talking specifically about the Los Angeles Dodgers, and about the Dodgers, about the fans in left field and the bleachers. She was saying, I went to a Dodgers-Cardinals game. I'm a Dodgers fan. The Cardinals fans, they were all white, and seriously, I got this question. Whenever the Cardinals scored a run, the Cardinals fans were all polite and so forth. But whenever the Dodgers would score, all the Dodgers fans were all Mexican. They would make it a point of saying "screw you" to the Cardinals fans. So she said, "Why are Mexicans like that?" And I told her, "Honey, you haven't been to Philadelphia, have you?" or Philadelphia or Oakland Raiders fans. Or to me, one of my favorite YouTube clips that I've seen this past year happened at Giant Stadium after, I think it was a Jets game, where there was a bunch of Jets fans. So out there, New Jersey, New York, there's going to be a lot of ethnic whites, Italians, Poles, and so forth. They got this vending cart. They're pushing it, and they threw it off a four-story stairwell, and they're like, yeah. I bet you there wasn't a single Mexican in the audience. It's just Jets fans. Sports fans are kind of nutty. They're just nutty people. So I'm always surprised. And when they asked that question, I laughed because I said, where the hell would you even think of a question like this? That said, I'll answer it. So I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all in that sense that people do come up with all these various questions, but I am surprised at just the breadth of the questions that I get from all corners of the human mind and the human experience. Another question right there?
Yeah, so you have your, the contents of your book sort of organized in all sorts of great topics, and then you talked about your own sort of internal database of lots of questions. What categorizations do you use sort of for yourself that are different from the ones here in the books, like to think about the different?
Oh, sure. So as I said earlier, the book itself, it's broken up into chapters based on the most popular topics that I get. So I said earlier, immigration, fashion, music, ethnic relations, sex, food, just culture. Culture is just so huge. But there's other questions in my own database, or my own archives as I call them. There's also like mini subtitles. So one of them, for instance, is Canada. For whatever reason, I don't know why, I get a lot of questions from Canadians. And almost, I swear to you, the most popular question that I get from Canadians, I've gotten it at least a dozen times, is something that goes roughly like this. Us Canadians, we're nice people. You Mexicans, you guys are nice people. Those Americans, they're a bunch of assholes. Why don't both of our countries unite and take over the United States? I don't know where that comes from. I told that question to a friend of mine who works for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and she laughed, and in her Canadian accent, which I want to try to repeat here, she said, "God darn us Canadians, even when we're trying to be racist, we're the nicest people on earth." So I get a lot of so many questions from Canadians. I said I have to start my own Canada section. So once in a while, I'll put in Canada section. I get a lot of questions about history. I get a lot of questions, or some questions I call them one-liners, which are questions that are so stupid that I could answer just with a one-line response. Geez, what else? Oh, under culture, I get questions about sports. I get questions about toilet matters, like why don't Mexicans flush their soiled toilet paper into the ocean? All types of things. So, and the more questions I get, the more subcategories I have to get. Eventually, one day I'm going to do my own. So instead of just doing it off a Word document where I have to scroll through 238 or 245 pages, I'll just do my own electronic database just to make it easier for myself.
Can you use Google Docs?
Google Docs, yeah. If you guys could help me, that'd be awesome. Other questions? Right there.
Sort of apropos of that. So you have this great list of questions on your laptop that's kind of like can keep you in business for a long time. How often do you back it up?
I back it up like a madman. So I have it saved here. I also have it saved on my computer at home and my computer at work, and I keep emailing myself all the time, so it's saved on the servers of my, of both my own personal email address and my work email address. Yeah, that's why I also carry this around. I carry my laptop with me everywhere I go. When I was honored by the California State Legislature for, I got an award called the Latino Spirits Awards, which is given to people who have given positive contributions to Latinos or to the Latino community in California. I carried this with me into the state assembly. The security wanted to take it from me. I said, hell no. And so they said, no, we could take care of it. No, I walked in, I had my award, and it was all bulky because I carried it with me. And so Fabian Nunez, the speaker at the time, he said, why don't you just handcuff yourself to your bag? I said, that would be a great idea, but I can't afford a handcuff right now. So now I'm very, very vigilant about saving and back saving and back saving and so forth. Other questions?
There's another.
Oh, another one.
I do have a more serious question.
Sure.
So it seems like to be able to write a column like this regularly and to get death threats and to have really a sense of humor about the kinds of questions that people can answer. I wonder about how your upbringing supported that, sort of becoming that kind of person.
The question was, given that the types of questions that I get, just how crazy all is, how did my upbringing help me support that thing? Well, I was raised by parents who taught me from an early age, stand by your beliefs, don't back down from, any of that. And they always supported me in whatever efforts I did, whether I was going to college or working as a data monkey or whatever. They always supported me. And then I would say that the more influential, the bigger influence came from working at the OC Weekly, because for those of you who haven't read the OC Weekly, it's an alternative newspaper, whatever that means nowadays. But historically, those were papers that came sort of from left of center and would always go against the status quo. So as a reporter, I usually go up against the people that I call the Lords of Orange County, people who get a free pass from everyone because they have a lot of money. And so whenever you do stories about them, though, they try to sue you, they try to call you a commie. You learn how to get a very thick skin very quickly by being a reporter like that. So in doing that column, it was just an extenuation of, or an extension, sorry, of being a reporter. And more importantly, though, I've always had the full support of my boss. Whereas in most newspapers or in most of the media community, when you have people saying, oh, this writer's racist or stereotypical or whatever, there's usually a meeting between the editor and the reporter saying, oh, basically lecturing them, because there's too much political correctness out there. So a lot of times newspapers fold under the pressure. My boss, on the other hand, he says, what are you talking about? This is a funny guy. I'm not going to get rid of him. And if they're still pressuring him, they'll say, you know what? Unless you can find me a better Mexican than this one, I'm not going to get rid of him. And so at that point, they're like, how can you say such an offensive thing like that? And then he'll say, you know what? That's the difference between me and you. I don't think that's offensive at all. I think that's pretty funny. I think you have no sense of humor. Click. So I mean, that's where I get that thick skin from having an upbringing like that. That's where I could say, hey, I love hate mail. In fact, I want more hate mail. Bring it on. I have a YouTube channel, so it's youtube.com/Ask a Mexicano, because a Mexican stole Ask a Mexican from me. So people leave some really nasty remarks saying, oh, your teeth are crooked or whatever. I love that. Whenever people say nasty stuff about you, that means they're thinking of you. Again, the worst thing you can do to me if you don't like me, don't say anything to me. That makes me scared. Question?
Based on the letters that you get and the comments on your YouTube channel, over time, do you feel that the racism is about the same, increasing, or decreasing?
The question was, given all the comments and just the length of the column, do I think racism, specifically toward me or just in general? Racism toward me, has it increased or decreased or about the same? I would say, as the column's been around now since late 2004, so about almost 3.5 years, I would say it's decreased, because it's decreased, but at the same time, the column keeps getting syndicated into different markets. So every couple of months, I get in a new newspaper, and I go through the same experience all over again, where people don't like it, people hate it, people say nasty stuff about me. I think, though, once people read the column, the people who do read it, even if they don't like me, they know not to send me a letter, because I'll probably publish it and rip them apart. And most people don't like to get ripped apart. So I've really seen a decrease overall of people who send me nasty remarks. I still get them from time to time, but I don't get them as much anymore. And I really miss you guys who would send such nasty, nasty letters about Mexicans, because I think people have learned that if you're going to send me a nasty comment, I'm not going to weep and moan about it. No, I'm going to smile, and I'm going to go right back at you, and I'm probably going to publish it and humiliate you in front of audience of God knows how many people read me. I don't know. I mean, the circulation for the column is about 2 million every week, but that's not to say all those people read it. But yeah, so I wish people would send more nasty stuff, but they don't, so I'm sad. Other questions? Right there.
What are some of your favorite Mexican restaurants in LA and the US?
I don't know too, believe it or not, I don't know too much about Los Angeles. The only parts I know of Los Angeles are East Los Angeles and Montebello, because that's where my parents, or that's where my dad's family was at. But whenever I'm in LA, I try to go to Guelaguetza, the Oaxacan restaurant. I know there's one in Palms, and I think they want to build one maybe here in Santa Monica, I'm not sure. But the one I always go to is in Koreatown, off of 8th Street, close to Western, not necessarily on Western, but it's close to the Wiltern Theater on 8th Street. Guelaguetza is Oaxacan food. Oaxacan food is like the best Mexican food in Mexico. It's just amazing, amazing cuisine. Big fan of taco trucks. I think it's a tragedy that taco trucks are trying to get outlawed in Los Angeles County. It's insane. I'd expect it in Orange County, but in LA, that's insanity. In Orange County, what are my favorite Mexican restaurants? There's a place that I went to recently in La Habra called La Perla Tapatia, basically kind of like Tapatio but Pearl. It's in La Habra off of, not Whittier, but Lambert. It's off of Lambert, and it sells this food stuff called a torta ahogada. Most of you know what a torta is? Torta, for those of you who don't know, I'm glad there's so many people nodding their heads. We're taking over, I'm telling you. Torta is basically a Mexican sandwich, but it's made with a French roll, really fat, whatever. Very stuff it in with food or whatever. In the state of Jalisco, they make something called a torta ahogada. They get the regular torta, they spread pinto beans on it, they put any type of meat you want, but then they drench it with a salsa. Torta ahogada translates as a drowned torta. So they drench it in salsa, they put onions on top of it. You eat it with the bolillo is really hard, so it's kind of soggy, but it's kind of hard, and you get it with a knife, and it's really just delicious. I reviewed it. If you go to the OC Weekly website right now, you can still find the review there, but it's just good food. Yeah, I could talk about food all day, so I'm not going to, but you have questions. Other questions?
Nobody? Okay. So what would you recommend if someone wanted to go learn more about Mexicans? A movie or a book other than your book, or
You stole my
song?
plug.
Yeah. No, I know the book. The book definitely. I suggest you tell people about it. It's really funny, and you learn. There's a lot to learn in there. But what about a movie or a TV show or something you would recommend?
To learn about Mexicans, that's kind of hard. It's not like you could just get a manual besides my book, where you could say, everything you want to know about Mexicans or so forth. One great movie that everybody here should see, because I still say it's the best commentary ever on immigration, is Born in East LA. Born in East LA with Cheech Marin. If you grew up here in Southern California, you would see it almost every weekend on Channel 5. Just show it again and again. So Born in East LA, it stars Cheech Marin of Cheech and Chong fame, where he portrays a guy named Rudy, Mexican-American, born in Los Angeles, doesn't know any Spanish. He goes pick up his cousin who's working at a factory, but then the factory gets raided, so he gets deported back to Tijuana because he doesn't have any documents, but the immigration doesn't believe that he's a U.S. citizen because he's Mexican, he's wearing a Dodgers hat, and he has a mustache. So the entire film deals with him trying to sneak back into the United States. And it's really funny. There's a lot of goofy humor. It stars, who else? Daniel Stern, Paul Rodriguez, who's the dad on Ugly Betty? Tony Plana. All these great actors. So it's very much a comedy, but the satire, the different levels of it, it's such a great commentary on the looniness on both sides. So if you guys really want to know about immigration, see Born in East LA. You'll laugh, you'll cry, and then you'll buy it on DVD.
Yeah.
Buy it on DVD for $1 from a street vendor, of course.
And one of the best scenes is when the Neil Diamond song comes on, and they're all lined up at the border.
Yeah, where Cheech Marin, he's up.
So good.
They're right on the U.S.-Mexico border, so the Border Patrol, they're saying, let's go get that illegal immigrant. There's two guys, and one of the guys takes a leak next to his Jeep, and then all of a sudden this humongous wave of Mexicans, it's almost like in Sparta when you have all those Persians, or the 300, you have all those Persians just descend on that, and so you have the song America by Neil Diamond, blah, 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 da, da, go into America, and so forth. I'm sorry, I can't sing like him. And they just overrun it, but it's done in such a funny yet inspiring way. There's no way you cannot love that scene or that movie.
All right.
Any other questions? Don't be shy.
All right. Well, thank
That's
you.
it.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'll sign all copies of your book. I'll see it right here. But thank you very much for having it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Kirkland.
Appreciate it.